Areas of ambiguity in Scrum. This is places where human judgment is required to decide what to do or how to interpret the official Scrum rules. Humans learn and apply Scrum. It is not something done by computers. We interpret various aspects of Scrum differently. Some interpretations are clearly and logically discounted in the Scrum Guide, but there are areas where actually the Scrum Guide might have left open some things that are pretty ambiguous. The Scrum Guide refers to itself as the rules of the game. Think about a game like soccer or baseball. There are a core set of rules where if you change the rule, you're not really playing the same game anymore. Soccer and football are both played on big fields with balls. Does having a ball make it soccer or football or baseball? It depends on the other rules. One question that comes from a careful reading of the Scrum Guide is this concept of how much self-organizing can a Scrum team actually do? Can a self-organizing Scrum team change the rules of the game? Can the team decide to exclude some of the rules? We're not going to do a daily Scrum anymore. That would be an example of excluding a rule. Or can a Scrum team add a rule? We're going to create a new meeting called Product Backlog Refinement Meeting. The question is it still Scrum if the Scrum team changes the rules? The founders of Scrum, they would like us to respect the rules, but how much can we change it and still call it Scrum? One thing that I want to clarify though is that changing the rules of the game is independent from whether or not what a team is doing is effective or not. This is mostly about labels and definitions. Another way to think about this is in terms of branding. One of the big banks in Canada, there's a green bank, for example. If some pawn shop were to suddenly use that green bank's logo, that would be kind of offensive. Same thing applies to Scrum. The owners of Scrum have set up this definition. How far can we vary for that before we become disrespectful of it? Even within the very senior levels of Scrum trainers and coaches, this is not a settled question. In the past, the product owner and the Scrum Master were absolutely required to be different human beings. The Scrum Guide no longer includes that rule. In the history of Scrum, the separation was required because of a perceived conflict of interest. The product owner cares about the delivery of value. The Scrum Master cares about the team and the process. The idea was that if they were the one person, one of those two things would suffer, and that by separating the role into two separate people, you would have that balance necessary. The Scrum Guide no longer says anything about whether these two roles can be fulfilled by one person. Is it going to be effective if we have a Scrum Master and product owner together? Do we respect the history of Scrum? Or is this just something that's left to our judgment? As a Scrum trainer, I recommend that it start out separate. Some teams can make it work as an individual who holds both roles, but I would say those are usually the very small Scrum teams, 5, maybe 4 people even, which actually, based on their size, probably just shouldn't be doing Scrum in general. Use Kanban or something else. Another area of ambiguity, whether or not the Scrum Master and product owner roles are each occupied by a single human across multiple sprints. Now, of course, people change jobs and so forth, so we expect some change over long periods of time. Historically, the roles were associated with individual people who would stay in that role over a long period of time. There are some senior Scrum people who actually assert the product owner could even change within a sprint multiple times. So this is an area of ambiguity, and I feel strongly that stability is important here, partly because of the Scrum value of focus. I have seen a Scrum team where the Scrum Master switched every sprint, and in fact, the team deliberately rotated its membership through the Scrum Master role. For that team, it was effective as a temporary thing. But eventually, one person became the permanent Scrum Master. Another area of ambiguity is when you have multiple Scrum teams working on a single product. This is a scaling question. Of course, there are many scaling frameworks: SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, Scrum at Scale, Large Scale Scrum. These scaling frameworks all have different answers to this question. In the Scrum Guide, every Scrum team has a product owner. But the Scrum Guide also says if there is multiple teams teams working on a product, there is one product backlog, and a product backlog has only one product owner. So this is an example of a potential contradiction or paradox. Is there just one chief product owner, or does every Scrum team have its own product owner? Both can be effective, but what's the right answer? It's going to depend for your situation.